Okay, hello everybody. My name is Camille Rocca. Thanks for joining us for the Postgrad Futures information webinar on art and ecology. So we have a professional certificate and a professional diploma. My colleague Gareth Kennedy will talk you through everything. We'll be at most half an hour talking about this, and then we will have Q&A at the end, so we can talk about any questions. The Q&A won't be recorded. And I'm going to hand you over now to Gareth Kennedy, who will talk you through everything. I'm going to disappear into the background, but I'll be here. If you have any questions, you can put them into chat. So over to you, Gareth. Thanks.
Thanks, Camille. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Gareth Kennedy, and I'm a lecturer at the NCAD, and I'm one of the kind of lead coordinators on this course. So the ground we're going to cover here is, just a kind of introduction, who's running the course, and we're going to move on to course content. We're going to look at kind of the hours or the kind of demands on your time that this course would take. We'll cover who should apply and how, and then we'll kind of look at, like, well, what's in this in terms of your career or your practice or your life indeed, So and then we'll move on to kind of some questions and answers. So just firstly, just to introduce ourselves, these are the three lead course lecturers. So myself, Gareth Kennedy, Shodeen O'Sullivan, and Mark Clare, and we've kind of put this course together in a very kind of collaborative kind of fashion. And just to say, this will be the third cycle of this course. So we've a very established roadmap for how to run this course, which still, because we're dealing with ecology and the nature of the site where we're working, it's still a very quite a playful, nimble structure, but a structure nonetheless. So just to speak to myself, Gareth Kennedy, I've almost 20 years professional practice as a contemporary artist. I've worked nationally and internationally. I've worked on everything from public art commissions to exhibitions to publishing, across film and sculpture, and just kind of in recent years, I've been running what's called NCAD field at an undergraduate level in the college, and that's a pedagogy that's really very much born out of the pandemic, where we needed to meet face to face, but also we needed to introduce critical ecological thought and action into the art and design education of our students. So that's running 4 years, and that's a kind of program that runs. Sometimes it overlaps quite interestingly with the CFA, with the professional diploma and certificate. Next we have Shodeen O'Sullivan, and Shodeen's website is there, shodeenosullivan.com. Shodeen again has got like 20 years experience or so, and she would have actually done her master's in NCAD and done a lot of work on kind of green spaces or urban and derelict spaces and their potentials in the area, and then went on to kind of do a lot of work with kind of community gardening and a whole host and array of kind of different exhibitions and projects, just related to art and ecology. So she's got a very embedded knowledge of the area, as well as the issues. So she's a really brilliant asset. And then, of course, Mark Clare. Mark Clare is based between Dublin and Berlin, has a really well-established international art practice, and is just really brings, great experience to bear on the course. So that's the three kind of core lectures, and we kind of we oscillate, we lead different things, and it's just kind of very important that you're exposed to different voices, different and albeit complementary voices in your learning, and it just gives you much more kind of latitude within your learning, So this is just showing you a kind of feel there, an image of this. Is what's kind of particular about this course is we have this very particular site beside the college, and what this course is about is it's about exploring working methods, skills, and theories relating to how contemporary art and design intersect with this thing we call ecology, which is kind of living systems, living relationships, with the human, and indeed what we call the more than human world. So it's a very practical course. It's what we call an immersive experiential course, and there's a lot of learning through doing. So there's workshops that happen within the situated environment that we have, which is the field there you see in that image. And we work very directly with this space, and there's a whole storied history to this space, which as you undertake the course, that reveals itself and it's uncovered. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but suffice to say that this space was deemed derelict 10 years ago, and you know, it was extraordinarily greened. There's a history of how the space was greened through a thing called guerrilla composting. And now a lot of our coursework at undergraduate and postgraduate level is really about appraising this place, not as a derelict or brownfield site, which it is at a kind of council level or at a city planning level, but how do we reappraise this site maybe as this thing called a novel ecology? And I'll come back to that a little bit later. What's really unique in particular about this site is how do we learn and how do we learn to think and learn outdoors at level 9 university level. So this is really quite novel, as I'm sure most of our educational learning has happened indoors. And that's a kind of inheritance of modernity. And our kind of theory, our theory is to reckon with the times we live in, to reckon with like things like climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, that's best done outdoors in an immersive kind of context. So we frame the field as an outdoor classroom, a hedge school, so to speak, for the 21st century. And what's particular about it is it's a site for nature connection, and for commoning. And I'll come back to this term commons and the commoning very later. It's also a key part of our ethos and our learning. And it's this idea that this idea of learning to learn outside, learning to think outside. You'll be equipped with the skills to maybe do this yourself and bring that into your own practice or your own pedagogical practice or your own institutional context. And that's really what we're looking for. So as outcomes. And a kind of key part of that although it's very practical, it's very hands-on, the course, what's really important is kind of rigorous and critical research methodologies, creative and critical thinking skills, and how they might be applied, how they might be kind of tested in this wonderful site we have beside the college. Right. So as I said, this kind of pedagogy was born out of the pandemic. I was teaching Zoom or sculpture on Zoom, which is not a good idea. So there was a real appetite to meet face-to-face, to do face-to-face learning. So this was indeed this course, NCAD Field, which operated at undergraduate level, was during the pandemic one of the few courses that could meet face-to-face, and that made it very distinctive. And core work at undergraduate level, but also as part of your certificate and diploma in this course, is collective and individual work to reckon with the past, present, and future potentials of this site that we call NCAD Field. So that on the right is the college, which is the old Powers Whiskey Distillery, and here is this kind of like site that was once a car park, then fell into dereliction, and then through a radical act of care was greened some 10 years ago and became indeed a haven for urban horticulture. You'll see the old raised beds there, but then it fell into this disuse. And what happened was a really interesting wilding process took place there. So this has become like almost this kind of haven for biodiversity, in a very urban context. And we call this novel or curious or weird biodiversity you find there, we call this a novel ecology, And what we do in terms of interfacing this with critical theory is this idea that it's rhizomatic learning. So the people who have come to do the course thus far have had fantastic life experience, fantastic skills, fantastic practices. They come from kind of myriad backgrounds. And what's really important for Mark, Shodin, and I is to set up a learning system where people can learn together and from another, so that we draw on that really wonderful resource of life experience and professional experience people bring to the course. So this is a kind of diagram of fungi I show people to illustrate this idea of being rhizomatic, um, but also to being interconnected. And we encourage each learner on the course to become a mushroom or to pick a fungi and to think how they connect to others on the course, but also, how they might form relationships in the field, with the college community, and of course with the broader kind of liberties area. And a lot of kind of coursework works with this kind of metaphor for systems thinking or organization. It's quite distinct from another diagram I could have shown you, was one of a tree. This idea of a tree of knowledge, that all you guys come and do the course, you're trying to climb the tree, and Shodin, Mark, and I are at the top of the tree as the keepers of all knowledge and the keepers of all the things you need to learn. We don't work that way. That's un-ecological, because it's not drawing on your kind of strengths. What we're really interested in is how you guys come together, work together, and reckon with this oddball weird space beside the college to kind of like learn together, and to common that learning and that knowledge. And thus far it's been super generative and really, really enriching. And so, like, kind of key things I might draw out of that slide there is this idea that rhizomatic learning within it, the community is the curriculum, So we really evolved the course around you guys as a collective that come together in relationship with the field, in relationship with the liberties. That's kind of really, really important, that it's a very specific place. So it's this idea that the coursework is contingent on place and on communities of what we call place and interest. And then ultimately we're kind of modest, that really we're just kind of setting up a system of learning that recognizes that knowing is a long process of becoming, that objectives don't pre-exist your involvement in the course. That wouldn't be interesting. If you were going on a course and we had all the answers already of what the outcomes are going to be, that wouldn't be a rhizomatic or an ecologically interesting or a creative course. So we really work with who comes to us, to kind of like try and create that matrix and that web of relationships between you guys, but also between the field and the liberties. And again, something we're acutely aware of, the kind of learning we do is experimental, it's experiential, and it's environmental. And that kind of recognizes that there's different ways of learning, that there's cognitive and intellectual ways of learning. There's also kind of material or haptic or somatic, which speaks to your bodily experience ways of learning. There's direct experiential learning. There's kind of there's a philosophical dimension to what we do, richness to what we do. It's also kind of emotional, and we run a course that really recognizes all those kind of different faculties to kind of evolve your learning holistically. And what's kind of really interesting about the course is about how we're dealing with environmental time, which is cyclical, and how academic or school or university time is linear and progressive. So this is philosophically quite an interesting thing. How do we blend our learning with the seasons, even though we're still within a kind of academic framework? And that's quite challenging, but within those limitations, it can be incredibly generative and productive. And the learning that's taken place there can give insight how you might introduce cyclical time and cyclical learning, environmental time and environmental learning into your own busy lives and into your own, modern, maybe institutional work practices, And again, this is kind of really important that we're really interested in systems change, um, um, and how kind of a new set of kind of ecological metaphors or practices or processes can really, like, affect our systems and kind of change our systems and make them more robust, resilient, and indeed, perhaps abundant and better for well-being. We have an ethos within the field, that's evolving. I'm going to dance through these quickly now. We have this idea that the field is not about landscaping. It's not a landscape, it's a taskscape. And this idea of the taskscape comes from the anthropologist Tim Ingold. And that's this idea that a taskscape is a place of co-creation through human and non-human practices. So sometimes the kind of idea of landscape is kind of set, a place should look a certain way. Maybe there's an image or a design that place needs to conform to, or a memory that place needs to conform to. Taskscaping puts that on its head, and it realizes that places look the way they do through human and non-human labor, or human and non-human practices, that kind of like make the places look just so. So that's an interesting provocation for learners and students. It's kind of like, what practices will you bring to the field to model it, and how will you be responsible for that practice? What's the nature of that practice, So that's one kind of conception we have of how we model the space. Another is that the field is a commons. It's an experiment in commoning, and the commons, and the commons is this idea that this is not a public space, it's not a private space. It's a space of very specific usership. It's a space where certain people, in this case you guys do in the course, get access to. So it's not public in that we don't open the doors to the public, and it's then if we did that, it would have to look like a public park. The way I talk to students about, like, what is the commons versus a public park, try and dig a hole in your public park and see what happens. It probably won't end well. But within the commons, the act of digging a hole can be kind of negotiated. So I have a definition there. This idea of the commons, it's open source space with respect, again, to human and non-human worlds. But that open source space, you need to have a kind of shared ethos of use, for what you might do there. And we're really interested in that kind of theory around the commons. And there's a lot of discussion around the commons being a really good model for giving people back a stake in land and landscape, and also to help generate some of the kind of community-based resilience we're going to need going into climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And then finally, this idea that the field is a novel ecology. So that's to say, it's a haven for biodiversity and unexpected human and non-human entanglements. The theory novel ecology comes from originally 2013, and it's this idea that they're typically found in urban spaces and spaces that have been used and disused by human action, and that the kind of mix of flora and fauna there is really kind of unusual and odd because of that history of use and disuse, and just because of different plants and animals maybe arriving this space from everywhere. So there's no baseline in a place like the field. We can't look at it and say it once was a woodland, unless we go back very far indeed, very, very far indeed. And in the context of the Liberties, to find a woodland there, you'd need to go back probably 2,000 years or so, certainly pre-Viking Dublin. So these kind of things and how we factor those together. This is an image I kind of show that kind of articulates this context of the novel ecology, and this idea of a kind of new nature, a kind of new dynamic nature. Because the space was used and then disused as a horticulture space, it's kind of established its own unusual rhythm or ecology, which is actually quite sophisticated. So what we have here in this image on the right is a female sparrowhawk visiting the field, spent the day hunting in the field. We were making jam from Dublin's oldest pear tree. That's another story. But you can see this female sparrowhawk, it's on an echium, pinnata, I think, that originally comes from the Canary Islands. And it's that echium's grown out of what's actually a mound of compost, human-made compost, which is home to 2 urban foxes, which really arrests the rat population in that area. It predates upon the rats, so that's very useful. That's very helpful. Our foxes, we consider them as fellow taskkeepers. And what we have here is a proliferation of self-seeded kale that I joke and say would have been introduced during the time of the hipster in the field. And the hipsters are now gone, but this kale is continuing to flourish in the field. And we use that, of course, in a lot of coursework. And again, it's become part of the kind of ecology. So anyway, yeah, so this kale, which is now becoming part of the ecology of the site, in that it's allowed go to flower, which creates early food for our bees. We keep bees in the field. And then it's also allowed go to seed. So that attracts the sparrows and the other small birds, which in turn attracted this female sparrowhawk, you know. So it's again how extraordinary things happen within this kind of wild system, and how that becomes a kind of source of intrigue and study for us to kind of understand this as a kind of novel ecological system. I hope that's some kind of backdrop, kind of theoretical kind of backdrop to the context of the field. And some of the language I'm using, I hope, is accessible, you know, by way of describing this kind of phenomena, these kind of phenomena. But in terms of just kind of structure, there's four modules if you undertake the diploma, and they're plotted seasonally onto the life of the field. So it's seasonal learning, cyclical learning. And the first one of those, which is a certificate, that's called Principles. And we typically inaugurate that on the summer solstice. So on the kind of longest day or day around, you know, depending how it falls. And this is called Principles. So the way each module works is there are 4-week engagements with 1 day a week contact. And that 1 day a week is an intensive, action-packed day, 80 to 90% outdoors. And then learners go about their way. You're given course content in advance of that, reading, screening, listening. So again, it's kind of mixed material. You know, and also maybe kind of a gathering or a making exercise. So again, it's kind of drawing on all your different kind of faculties for how you might learn. And that's the kind of prep work before we meet. And that kind of lays the groundwork for meeting and hitting the ground running. And then after that, what typically happens is learners are asked to kind of reflect on that experience and then bank that experience, and then more material arrives in preparation for the next week. So it's a 4-week course. It's plotted onto the summer. It's 1 day a week immersive tasks, exercise, reading, screenings, listening in preparation for each day. So you're primed and you're ready to go. And the idea behind Principles is to establish a sense of togetherness and common terms of reference and understanding, both of the field of sight and this way of learning we call critical ecologies. And it's what's really important as well, you know, is how learners develop an understanding in common with one another. So there's a lot of collaborative work that's done, discussionary work that's done. But we balance that also with kind of solo, more kind of introspective kind of work, you know. So this initial course, it lays the foundation for progression to diploma. People have made really good new friends and colleagues by the end of it. This we know for sure. But it's also a standalone course in its own right. That's really important. And it's all resolved by a review day where the group comes together to activate the field and to common their knowledge. So to kind of share your research and understanding. And that's always incredibly kind of rich. Everyone, almost most of all us who run the course, learn so much about the field's potentials. And you'll see an image there of kind of Marcus Collier of Trinity College, who's the lead on the Novel Eco research project, where we got this kind of novel ecology language from, some of it from. So he comes as well, or another trained ecologist and botanist comes, called Dr. Lorraine Archer. And that's just kind of really important science, art, design, moment of interface, you know. After that, you move on to what's called collaboration, and that's plotted onto the autumn-winter cycle. And that's typically ran by Mark Clare. And again, that's just kind of building on the principles and building on this idea of collaboration with one another, collaboration with non-human entities, and also collaboration with community, collaboration with specialists, collaboration with maybe local council or fundraisers, you know. So that's quite a broad gambit. And again, it's building capacity within the group that's going on to the diploma. So collaboration within the group, that's really important. And then finally, or not finally, sorry, then it's followed by practice, the practice module in the spring. That's coming up. We're starting that in about 2 weeks time. And this is much more when the course kind of pivots into a space of like, how is this course going to serve you? How are you going to integrate the learning of the course into your own work, your own life, your own practice, maybe into your own institutional context? So that's where practice is this kind of pivot point where you start making the course your own and really refining and defining how you can put this to use. And then finally the capstone, which finishes around the summer solstice as well, brings you full circle. And that's where you kind of realize the work. The group realizes their projects in the field. And also, like last year, we hope to secure it again this year, NCAD gallery. So we have this kind of, you know, exhibition space, but also this very particular site from which to do work. And all that adds up to 20 credits, which is the diploma. And I think I've kind of explained these notes here. Yeah. So again, it's this idea every week, you know, it's the same model each season, 4 weeks intensive, 1 day a week where we meet. That's called the immersive day. Typically the tasks, exercise, reading, screenings, listening, and preparation for each day, that adds up to about 5 or 6 hours focused preparation, you know, in advance of the day together. And then, you know, as you progress maybe around capstone, there's additional hours you'll be putting in just to make the very best of it, you know. So all these modules, they build successively on principles, which is a standalone course. And it all builds this comprehensive kind of understanding of this place, because you've experienced the place in 4 seasons. That kind of learning and the way you evolve through that immersion is really very special. And you know, obviously it's fairly unique in an Irish context, an Irish third level context, to have that things track the season so acutely, you know. Kind of on career opportunities, to speak to that. So this is a kind of quote I kind of use from T.J. Jamos, a theorist. So the climate crisis is not just an environmental crisis, it's a crisis of creativity and imagination. And then I'm kind of pairing that with this from the from Ireland's 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan. And this describes how it strives for a whole of government, whole of society approach to the governance and conservation of biodiversity. The aim is to ensure that every citizen, community, business, local authority, semi-state and state agency has an awareness of biodiversity and its importance and of the implications of its loss, while also understanding how they can act to address the biodiversity emergency as part of a renewed national effort to act for nature. So we need skills for doing that. We need skills for translating this policy and making it accessible, tangible, and indeed joyous for communities and businesses and individuals to kind of enact this kind of change, to enact this act for nature. And this the field and the learning you do there and how where you go with it and how you evolve that, it can very much like connect to this, you know. I mean, local authorities, community groups, schools, third level educations. I was at the Green Campus get together last week where all the campuses of Ireland were showing what they're doing in terms of climate action on biodiversity. And this, you know, the skills are needed, ways of bringing people together and again, you know, bringing people outdoors again and integrating people into their place and environment. There's manifold benefits to that, you know, from even from a therapeutic point of view, you know. So there's, you know, there's myriad kind of opportunities for you to take this and integrate it into your existing work, or also kind of pivot and go elsewhere elseways with your work and your practice. I'm just kind of showing you that kind of one. This is a last summer's group. They're not all there actually. They're all dressed in yellow. It's not a cult. But this was just a kind of little kind of outcome. These material processes we do, and they're not an end in themselves. It's where we use the kind of buddleia flowers, which are absolutely abundant. The buddleia plant, you might know it, it's kind of indicative of dereliction in urban spaces, but the flower gives this wonderful yellow dye, you know. So this is just kind of a way we kind of bookended their kind of engagements in the principles course during the summer. And, you know, to kind of speak to some of the people in that course there, we've got digital media artists there, we've got a sculptor, we've got a retired school teacher. We've got someone who taught in disability, art and creativity in disability and art and therapy. We have someone that's an archaeologist and heritage officer and teaches. We've got a forest school teacher. We've got a ceramicist. We've got somebody who works for an NGO. And we've got someone who works with fabrics kind of there, fabric and textiles, and there's more besides, but that's kind of a range of the kind of diversity of people. We've also had horticulturalists, people from the National Museum of Ireland. Yeah, it goes on and on, a really, really rich mix. We've had recent graduates, and then we've had people who are lifelong learners, who are retirees. So it's a really wonderful mix we attract. And again, that's back to this idea of why we need to common our knowledge in a course such as this, because the people who come and do it bring so much to it, you know. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. You know, I'm going to leave it there. I'm just a little bit over time, so any kind of questions, and I see you can type them in the chat as well. That's quite a good place.
Gareth, thanks so much for that. It was really interesting. Yeah, we have 5 minutes for questions, 7 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, you can push in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. Thanks.